We've got two members of the Cosmic Voices team here today. We've got Jeanne Love and we've got Dan Drasin. Dan and Jeanne are going to be presenting next week. And for those of you who are not yet aware, the Cosmic Voices material is absolutely fabulous. It's really up to date, recent evidential channeling. Dan, can I bring you in on this one? What in the Cosmic Voices, have there been any references to reincarnation?
That's a good question. I would have to read through dozens of the entries to answer that question. Most of the entries on the site focus on the direct experience of folks who've passed over.
Yes.
And it's less sort of reflective and philosophical than it is a communication of direct experience. I think that would be fair to say. Jeanne, how would you agree with that?
I very much appreciate Richard's synopsis, and it's just very timely and interesting, and there's lots to be added to it. I think it would be great to have a conversation with you sometime, Richard, about that kind of thing. As a medium for many, many years, and all mediums will channel according to their own consciousness and their own belief system. We try to be as clean and clear as possible. Cosmic Voices, like Dan said, is really reflective of their experiences and passing over, and they're very different. I mean, when Dan and I and Cindy and Regina were working on this, we even kind of argued amongst ourselves as what it must be like on the other side. And that's kind of the way it is amongst certain people, depending on what their experiences are, what their expectations are. But there are some definite mentions in some of the material. There's so many writings on there, like Dan said, I'd have to go back through it and look at it specifically. And today is the anniversary of the Challenger explosion and accident. And I found that interesting because I was just reading through some of the material from Krista McCullough that came through in 1986, talking about how to adapt to her new life, try to understand what this was all about, her experiences there. We were talking to her in terms of reincarnation and understanding about that, and just it's all timely to what you guys have been talking about today and what Richard brought to the forum here. So yes.
And Jeanne, that really fascinates me because a lot of our teachers say that nothing comes by chance. Those that you've been working with, have they come to any sort of understanding that this was my time, rather than when they first went over, you told us that Krista was absolutely in horror at what had happened to her?
Very good question. And yes, they do. There is a separation, we talk about the high self, the higher self. Where did that come from? When Richard was talking about, do we incarnate or is it reincarnation? The point is that some of us come in really knowing what we want to do when we get there. Some of us have had a specific contract, and then we've had to rewrite it 4 or 5 times. This is a free will environment in this particular planet, and this particular system, as Seth calls them. I do channel Seth all the time. I've stayed low because of Robert Butts and his "I'm going to sue you," but that's another story. So the whole point of that is they have come to an understanding as they've been over there, because they've been able to then go back to the rest of themselves, to access the rest of themselves. I view what Richard says pretty closely, but there are a few little variances, which is, whatever it is. Still, the point is that there is much more consciousness that we leave behind every time we choose a life form and come in. And there's going to be stuff that's going to be kept from us because we wouldn't do it. My daughter, Kylene, who has been over 12 years now plus, she was very much brought up in this, and she very much told me from the other side what it was like, and there's been this incredible communication. And the joke with her is always, well, Mom, you wouldn't have done it if you knew what you had to do, because why would you? But it was there. I had a specific experience with her just before she went down through a series of health events, and she consciously was being made aware of the fact that she was staying, even though when she was leaving, even though she didn't understand what it was at the time. And I came to find out after she finally had passed. It took 4 months for her to die, or 3 months, whatever. That she had chosen to step out of this lifetime because it wasn't connecting the way she wanted it to. But of course, that wasn't going to be shared with her consciously. It's not much different from with Krista. She would not have ever stepped in that position if she'd known that she wasn't going to come back. But the thing is that when you talk about groups coming in together, which I really get, Richard, is that the group that I happen to be in is all about communication, that we don't die afterwards. And we've had this like endless project going on for probably 150 years, if you can quantify it that way linearly, to get this information out. And when we wanted to first have all this information and channel material out, the obstacles were tremendous to keep us from that. Some people lost their lives because of it, not just the psychic world, but regular scientists. It is a very particularly dark story if you want to look at it from that angle. But we don't remember these things that we're going to do if it's going to be bad. Sometimes people do have an omen or a sense they're not going to live long. But other times it's just we are intensely doing what we have to do. We don't know why we're quite pushed, but we're pushed because we know we have to be, not necessarily knowing the full enchilada. We don't know how the full story, but we do what we were led to do. We keep moving forward along that path. And when the crew first came through, of course, they were devastated because they had, other than Krista, had been trained to be astronauts and be scientists and be very, very linear. And then everything just changed on a dime for them, and they were very angry about everything. But anyway, that's another long story. But there is very much within the crew, because they're still much in contact with us, as well as some of the other crews, like the Apollo, that yesterday was the anniversary for them, and the Columbia crew. And there has been a very much an awakening with them rejoining their parts and having that kind of illumination. So it comes through all the time with the people. I've channeled many, many, many people. And it's...
I wanted to say, Dan, that while I was writing the book, I also read Cosmic Voices. So I'm familiar with the material. I didn't find anything that, directly was useful for the book, even though I found the messages tremendously inspiring. In fact, I tried to read just one a day because, in the morning this is a great way to start. Jeanne, I just wanted to mention, I have an entire chapter on soul groups. And I don't use the term soul contract. I use this term soul pact. And for instance, I talk about the twin flame relationship. I talk about romantic relationships. One of them that I talk about is, I call it the mission relationship, where souls get together and say, okay, we're going to accomplish a certain goal while we're on the planet. And it sounds like you're in a mission relationship with those who are doing the work you do. And, mission relationships can be as mundane as starting a business with someone else and, providing employment and salaries for people, or it can be, higher goals, like, researching the cure for cancer, or it can be medium, getting mediums together. So that's a chapter I didn't go into at all, but I think that people who read the book will find it interesting. It also talks about how the tremendous coordination that's needed across, not only Earth lives, but parallel dimensions, working with soul families and groups, and to get it all to work together. It makes computers and what they can do on this planet just primitive by comparison.
Fascinating. I don't know about you, but I am fascinated with pre-birth communications. Most notably, Christian Sundberg's description of his decision to incarnate, and what happened when he aborted one incarnation. Once he arrived here, he decided it was just too much, and how he talked about how that affected a whole stream of lives of all the people that he had if he'd gone ahead with it, Do any of you have any thoughts on pre-birth communication and its relationship with reincarnation?
Well, I was just talking to my son-in-law the other day about this because I happen to have 4 daughters and 3 living, and my last one pregnancy was twins. And my one twin daughter married a lovely man, wonderful son-in-law, and we all live in the family house together, 3 generations. And his mother had her first pregnancies were identical twin girls, and she lost them. And so we've always said the comment about, we've always felt very connected that they were originally supposed to come in through Eric's mother and dad, but decided that it wasn't aligning correctly because of the connection they wanted to make with another, my ex-husband's and my kid's father. Long kind of, everybody was making rearrangements. So I came out, I was only going to have the 2 children, and then we said, well, how about 1 more, and then we had 2. So then here it was, and I laughed with Eric. I said, yeah, because if my daughters had been your sisters, then you couldn't have married one of them. And he laughed about it. He said, so we had to scramble around and change the order of things and where we'd be. It happens all the time. And I work with, I don't do readings anymore, but when I was doing a lot of readings or women who would have abortions or something would happen. And it was very clear about the spirit deciding that it didn't want to come in at that time or that place. It just wasn't aligning right when they say the stars are aligning, because there's so many variables in this particular world that we're in. Is that free will? You set up your contracts, you set up, or whatever semantic word you want to use, you set up your programs, and then for some reason somebody else decides not to show up. And so you decide, it changes everything. It's like the thread of a sweater unraveling, and it does. It changes everything because everybody else is having to switch and do this. And there's a whole realm of beings that came in that I call the window children between 1976 and 1980. That's another story all of itself. Someday I'll get this all written down. And consequently, because they didn't get the protection energetically that they needed coming in, they couldn't fulfill their contracts, and half of them left either through illness or just taking themselves out or an accident. But they're now coming back in another configuration that I call the dodecahedron community, because they had a lot of, that's another mission group, if you will, Richard, and that's another story. But they all had to reconfigure, and my daughter was one of them. And she left because she couldn't make the connections that she wanted to, and that's why she left, even though consciously she didn't know that's why she was going to go. But since we have such good communication between the worlds, if you will, it's as hard as it's been to have lost her. It's been amazingly forthcoming in information and wisdom and understanding. So yeah, there's all kinds of things. It's impossible to measure the possibilities. So it's unlimited and kind of exciting. It used to be overwhelming to me, but it doesn't overwhelm me anymore. It's like, oh, what am I going to find out today? So interesting.
Dan, what are your perspectives on this?
I always say you can't stuff 1,000 pounds of reality into the 5-pound bag of language.
Exactly.
And
that's a good phrasing.
So what's my perspective? I'm learning. My learning has gone through various stages. I've had some personal experiences. I've studied other people's experiences, done reading, met people who've had incredible experiences. And, now that my book is out there, I hear from all kinds of people who've had experiences.
Even more experiences.
Maybe the short answer is it's all about experience.
So what has changed you working with cosmic voices? Now, I understand that you have actually taken part in some of the channeling sessions, asking questions. Is that correct?
Right. There was a time when we were meeting at a home in Silicon Valley over a couple of years and had quite a number of sessions, many of which I recorded, some of which I videoed. And but for me, it was like a booster rocket in my own development. Actually being present for these channelings. And honestly, I'm still digesting it, even though this happened a couple of years ago. So, when I express myself about any of this, I just try to keep it really simple and basic. And I think that's the approach that I took in my book. Try not to speak beyond my knowledge, offer some simple ways of looking at things that can be useful to people, and stay open to more input. I keep hearing. I gave a little presentation last night here in Marin County, north of San Francisco, and met some people who've had experiences that I was unfamiliar with. So I'm always learning. In the course of these experiences and everything, I've met some really wonderful people, including our Jeanne and our team of mediums. And again, just to put in a plug for the website, it's cosmicvoices.network. Cosmic Voices, one word, .network. And we'll go there and poke around, look at the messages, also look at some of the other headings on the website, dig around, and maybe we can discuss this when we all gather next.
I'm looking forward very much to next week, and I'm very keen to get a copy of Cindy's 2 books too. 7 questions about 3 books she's written.
Well, these books, the first 2 books were co-written by Cindy and Frances Vaughan, who's on the other side. She was a well-known transpersonal psychologist, brilliant woman. And shortly, she died. Interestingly, one night she was out to dinner with friends and left. It actually happened on my birthday in 2017, though I never knew her at the time. And so we have some kind of connection. Anyway, Cindy, who was a mutual friend of hers, at that point started, she was motivated to learn automatic writing. And very soon, Frances started working through her to write these 2 books. First 2 books, 7 questions about life after life, 7 questions about the greater reality. The third book is a book of stories. It's called 7 Stories to Light the Way Home. And also authored by Cindy and Frances, but also with input from other people. And you can find them on Amazon.
Is Cindy going to be able to join you next week?
We hope so.
Right. Okay. That's good.
She has not been in the best of health. I think she'll do her best to be with us.
That will be lovely. So if people would like to pre-read those books.
In Amazon, it's Cynthia Spring.
Cynthia Spring. That's right.
Just put her name in. Those 3 books will come up.
We have more stories. The thing is, when the beings on the other side of the world decide, or life decide that you're going to set up a communication platform, everybody shows up. And we had more spirits than we had time for. And both Regina and myself have each probably 5 more stories from people. Whitney Houston, the singer, is, I can't remember all that I have and who she has. And so we're hoping to maybe put some in an archive and then bring some new ones out, because there's so much a part of this mission to answer as best they can the fact that we never die. And Richard was talking about, I'm sorry, I can't remember which one of you asked a question about how does reincarnation help change things? Why is that important? I don't know if it's Hyacinth or I'm not sure. Forgive me for not remembering. But Christopher McAuliffe was interviewed when I was doing some channeling sessions the first 6 months or so. I did most of it privately, but once in a while we'd have a more public forum, but it was limited to a small group of people. And somebody was saying to her, what's so important about us listening to you, Krista? What are you important? Because some people had expectations that if you're going to channel anybody, I remember this back in the 80s, it should be someone as important as, Gandhi, or a president, or some historical figure. Why would it be Krista McAuliffe, or why would it be these NASA astronauts? And they specifically asked Krista why it was important that we should even entertain the idea of reincarnation or incarnation, whatever that may be. And she said, because people would think twice about stabbing a person in the back if they knew they had to come back and reap the consequences of what they had sown. Every action is a reaction. That's science. And I still stand by that, whether, whatever we call it, however it's perceived, whether it's a part of the soul energy, it doesn't matter as long as we take the understanding and the information, I think, that's presented. And for Christet wisdom, we think differently. If people knew that we didn't die and that we lived on, it would change everything. It would change everything.
Absolutely.
And not just being a simple understanding, but a worldwide consensus towards that fact.
Go for it.
Another thing that we've worked with our team is they keep telling us that they want to communicate with us so badly, and they're frustrated that there are so few clear channels that they can use, that they've had to give out numbered tickets over there. And in a channeling from the pianist Liberace, he says, "I finally got my ticket in."
And Liberace said, "I had a previous life as a priest and a nun." That's right. And he said, and there was no fun there. So I said, I decided I wanted to come through this time. And he said, I was going to have a fun life.
Yeah.
I just thought that, wow, that was so interesting. Yeah. So that there wasn't a reference to reincarnation. That's what stayed in my mind. Yeah.
And for those who haven't visited the site, the main page of sort of directory page of messages is in two columns. One is folks you've probably never heard of, and the other one is names you will recognize. And this is partly due to Jeanne's. Jeanne, you might tell the story of how when you were young, someone told you that you'd be a medium to the stars, but what they didn't say was they'd all be dead.
Well, as part of that group, the mission group, and I actually was going to be a classical. I was a classically trained as a soprano, and was going to be on the concert circuit. But I decided that I really didn't want to travel all that much continually. I wanted to settle down and raise a family, and so I went into teaching, which I thoroughly loved. Also, was very grateful I had that skill. But then things started to push me out of that and to come back in. I was raised a Quaker, and so I was already in that mode of sitting in silence and listening to spirit. It was just a tremendous experience for me as a young person. But I had my first teacher, real flesh in the body teacher, came to visit me. I was the bookstore manager for the Unity Church in Whittier. And this little tiny Italian walked in one day, probably not even 4'11". She teased her hair up really high to look taller. Really tiny. She came in and she goes, "Your name Jeanne?" And I go, "Yeah." She goes, "Well, I'm a certified spiritualist minister." And she said, I got your name in meditation the other day and was told to come in here and teach you everything I know to you. And I'm like, and it was amazing. It was amazing. That was the start of many amazing experiences. But in that training and studying with her, one of the things she said to me was, "Oh, you're going to be a psychic to the stars." Because I really had no drive to be a medium or a psychic. That was not in my wheelhouse at all. And she said, "You're going to be a psychic to the stars." And I thought, oh, well, that's pretty cool. And then, as Dan said, but she failed to tell me that it was going to be to the dead ones. But I'm not there for all of the Hollywood people at all. It's a select group of people that I really resonate with, and I feel like they're all part of the soul mastermind group ball thing that Richard had shown us in one of his graphics. And so that's why these people have been a part of my energy field, and they still walk with us and help us out. And Robin Williams is one of them, who's hysterically funny and has us in stitches. I could never be that funny. But anyway, I'm grateful because the ones that are here for communication are very much humanitarianly oriented and to help uplift the human beings on the planet. So it's not just a sensational thing. And they come to me because I don't go out and spread the word. It's very intimate and small to help them in their recovery from the human field back to being an essence, a spiritual energy. So
I'm fairly sure that it would be quite easy to do some analysis of the speech patterns when they were living, and when they crossed over.
I just want to say that I think that's a fascinating idea, to compare speech patterns, choice of language, and so on. And at the same time, one of the things that we've learned is that the vocabulary as it comes through is somewhat limited by the vocabulary of the medium. For example,
Right.
in the channeling of the space shuttle crews, there's terminology they wanted to get across, which was not in the memory banks of the mediums.
Yeah.
And so they just had to do the best that they can with it. Jeanne, you might want to speak just from your own experience in that.
Oh, and you said that, I just went everywhere with that because there's so many instances. But I'll go to the two people who edited the transcribed material from the Foundation of Mind Being Research in Palo Alto, FMBR, and because they're all scientists and amazing people exploring consciousness. Anyway, the two people that were editing for their website, I have close contact with both of them still, lovely people. And Mark Smith, who was one of them, said to me, he said, there's no way that with the volume of material that was channeled between my channeling and what Regina channeled for the crew, on both crews, that we could have had the depth of patterns in speech structure, the syntax, the choice of words, the rhythm. He said it was all so distinctly different from each voice, from each person, whether it was Dick Scobie or whether it was Ron Hubbard, who was, and Willie McCool, who was on the Columbia. Every voice in speaking had a totally different structure. And he said that beyond anything convinced me that these were truly the people they said they were, because it was consistent. He said, how could I, turning to me saying, how could you, keep the threads of 7 voices over years of time so consistent? I mean,
Exactly.
I don't have that ability. There's no way. And so that was really the proof in the pudding. The other thing that came through when we were up there doing a lot of channeling, I'm glad that Dan really taped it all, is another famous person, Anthony Bourdain, came through, and it wasn't long after he had taken his own life. And he was so Anthony, and I didn't really know him that well. I didn't follow him that much. I mean, I knew of him. But Mark Smith, again, was sitting in that circle next to me, and he was blown away because it was so him. Of course, he was sitting next to me, so he could feel his energy, but he also, his speech patterns, his word choices, his mannerisms.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, beyond, I lived at 446 Rose Street, the personality is the thing, for me anyway, that I'm really good at channeling and bringing through the essence of the individual. I get names once in a while, but not regularly. I can get a lot of specific detail about a person and who they are as a personality, if I'm bringing someone through for a friend or someone who's lost a loved one. And every medium works differently. But it was good for me to hear that, because you often wonder, how much, what, I'm just the vessel, the telephone.
Richard, where to next with your book? How are you going to publicize it? How can we help you get it out there?
Well, there's not much you have to do for me, because I've already looked at Amazon, and I'm going to publish it through Kindle, and it looks pretty straightforward. So it's just a matter of going through the motions. I'm waiting for any other comments to come in, because I did send the manuscript to the various people. But I think I'm going to send them an email probably today or tomorrow, saying that you've got about a week left, because
Okay.
I really need to get this out.